We've been on the road. We've been boondocking for about a week now, which means no electricity, no power, no water, no sewer. We've just been living in the woods, moving around all around Wyoming, kind of with some friends, kind of roughing it. So I haven't been connected to the world for a while,
Okay,
which means I did not prep for this at all. So
that's okay.
I know I was sent some of your information, some of your bio, and I have not read it at all. So
That's okay.
so start me out. Tell me the basics. Go ahead and introduce. Podcast is 100% dad interviews with dads. So we're interviewing dads, and you're going to have a unique take on it. And so let's just go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and what you've got going on.
Yeah, so I'm Dr. Shemmassian. I live in San Diego with my wife and my 3-year-old son. He turned 3 about 2 months ago. We're in the middle of potty training. And I'm a Southern Californian, born and raised. I grew up in Los Angeles. And for work, what keeps me busy is I help people get into medical school. So I help people, participate in the right extracurricular activities, do well on their MCAT exam, which is the standardized test for med school, prep them for the application process. And between family and work and all the things to do in San Diego, that's pretty much sums up my life.
Okay. So we were in San Diego for a little bit back in February, I think. It's a fun little town.
It is. It's
It's
great
not
here.
little. It's not little at all.
But it's funny you say that because people here, behave like it's tiny. Our airport's not very big. There's a very small town feel, even though I believe it's like the 9th biggest city in the United States. But the culture and the vibe and the mentality is of a much smaller town.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice, not southern, but it's true. It's what SoCal is. I mean, it is definitely laid back. Your airport is wild.
Yeah.
The planes just come over like the top of houses and graze the roof of houses as it comes in and lands. It's absolutely
Yes,
wild.
it is absolutely the case. Yeah, you basically fly next to the skyline, and then land.
So
Pretty
do
crazy.
you run? So is it like so I've seen this before in St. Augustine, where we have University of St. Augustine. It's for physical therapists. It's kind of like a specific school for that doctorate route, I guess. Now, and they have there's a few private businesses where they have like study halls, and you can do study groups and things like that. And you go there and I don't know, you meet up and you train for these exams. Is that what you're doing?
So this is a bit different. So with medical school, usually you're planning out years in advance, taking certain courses at the university level, maybe even after your undergrad is done, and you participate in various extracurricular activities like physician shadowing or community service or research and all this kind of stuff. And a lot of people get involved in the wrong activities, quite frankly. When I say wrong, I don't mean they're bad, but they're big time commitments and they don't really move the needle for you. And so our part of our job is to make sure that students are, spending their time in the highest return activities that they also are very interested in. And doing that alongside, coaching them on whom to build rec letter relationships with and prepping for the MCAT exam, which is sort of like the SAT or ACT for college, but this time for medical school. And so there are a million different pieces. And then when it gets to the application part, helping people tell their story across their application essays, making sure that they're, getting proper interview coaching so they go in there and they can ace it, because a lot of times our students are asked to do stuff that they're never asked to do in school, right? Write these narrative essays about themselves and, interview for these high stakes admissions processes. And they're sort of thrusted into these things without really the proper background. And our goal is to help them do that.
So at what stage of the education process is preparing for med school? Is it post bachelor degree?
So no, it's actually ideally it's during. So we have students who begin working with us as early as their freshman year of undergrad. And, and then all the way through undergrad, there are some people who are considered, non-traditional students. So let's say there's a 28-year-old accountant who's like, you know what, I want to actually go into medicine. That's been my lifelong dream. I never did it. And so those folks will come to us too and say, well, help me get there. And everything in between. So really at any stage post high school, when people approach us for med school admission support, we do that.
So really, it could be up to 4 years? A client could last you 4 years.
And they could, yeah, they totally could. And then sometimes, they finish medical school or they're on the cusp of that, and then they come to us for assistance with their residency admissions process. So we have repeat students too, and it's a treat to sort of see. It flies by every time. It's crazy. It's like, you helped me 3 years ago. I want to do this
Sure.
again. And I'm like, oh my gosh, has it really been that long? I'm
So
like, yeah, I
how,
guess I did have a kid. All these things did happen between then.
so is this your business, or is this
It is.
like part of? Okay, so
Yes.
how'd you get started in that?
Kind of organically, and out of necessity. So I went to a small high school in Los Angeles where we didn't have much in the way of college admission support. And I was self-taught in that process because I wanted to go to certain good schools. And when I was in college, was studying, on how to get into medical school, and along the way assisting other people. And over time, how it goes, one person tells another, I got into this school, this person helped me reach out to them. And it was all word of mouth, and it just grew from there. And over time, I started, I wanted to share more resources. I was realizing that, a lot of the advice I was giving was, applying to a lot of students. And so I started looking for resources online, didn't quite find what I wanted to send people. So I started writing myself. And, through that sort of blogging effort, random people started reaching out to me, Townsend. So people would reach out and say, hey, I saw, I want to work with you. I'm like, I don't know who you are. I remember realizing the first time, I'm like, okay, now random people are reaching out to me. And I'm like, how did you find me? And they're like, oh, online. I'm like, oh my gosh. So this is how things get on Google. And so I started, learning more about that. And just one thing led to another. So it was a fortuitous, unplanned snowball. And here we are today.
So for the dads that are, working their job and kind of have some sort of side job or little hobby that they'd
Yeah.
like to see built up, at what stage were you that you decided you needed to put more effort, more time, more money into building this new business that maybe isn't so fruitful, versus keeping it as a hobby and sticking with your main source of income?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on this. So in full disclosure, I think I made this my full-time work a little bit too late. Like I could have done it way earlier. And I think that was part of it was my own anxiety about like, letting go of the sure thing and all this kind of, with a salary and benefits and all this kind of stuff. And I totally understand the challenges of doing that as a father. You want to take care of your family. At the same time, all of the signs were, hey, you could totally do this full time, and you're just sticking with full time job out of anxiety and whatnot. And so I think that it's wise for people to, if there's something that they're interested in doing, to do it on the side while working until they've built it up to a certain level where it can replace their salary, at least to an extent. um, for me, I actually years ago when I was saying, I started blogging heavily and developing materials, it was pretty funny. Um, we barely had like anybody on our newsletter, and we probably had, I probably had only a handful of students I was supporting at a time. But I remember distinctly there were like, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, late at night, writing these large resources for like the 12 people on my newsletter. Right. And my wife would say, just come watch this movie, um, whatever. You don't need to publish this thing today or tomorrow. And I said, no, no, no. There are people that that I told them I'm going to reach out every Friday with something, and I'm going to do that. I can't let them down. It's really funny. Now our newsletter, has way, thousands of people reading it every single week. And back then when there were 12, I still treated it like it had to be done, even though didn't have to be done beyond like the commitment I had made, in my head to these readers. And so I treated it that way. And it's worked out very well. And, people always tell me like, hey, I really look forward to reading your resources, like keep them coming, or I learned so much from this. So my advice to people is don't start taking it seriously when you see traction. Right. I think that people who are really successful with their ventures take it very seriously, even when they don't have, some big following or massive traction or anything like that. Because if you wait until that happens, it's going to be way less likely to happen. but B, you're not going to necessarily have the tools and the skills to, to deliver what you need to deliver. If you waited until you have, I don't know, 5,000 people on your newsletter, you might not have the writing skills necessary to, to take full advantage of those, eyeballs essentially, and to give those people what they need, from a value standpoint. So yeah, my advice is even if you're just starting out, obviously you should try what the different things that you like. But once you decide on the thing you like, you really have to commit to it. Don't do it half baked, because then it's gonna be a self-fulfilling thing where if it doesn't work out, you're gonna say, well, that wasn't a great idea anyway, or whatever. So it didn't work out. I'm gonna move on to the next idea. I don't think you gave it your full effort. So yeah, treat it ultra seriously from day one. And when you start to see the snowball and, all of the signs say, hey, look, this is actually yielding the fruit, that you're hoping for, it's going to be time to, consider maybe doing it full time or half time or whatever the case might be for you and your family. Every business is different. Some people's goals is, to make an extra $1,000 a month, an extra 10K a year, whatever. Other people, it's to replace their job. And for me, I didn't have that specific goal. I wasn't like, oh, I'm building this to one day do it full time. Not at all. But it was more so like, let me take this very seriously, see what happens, and we'll take it from there.
Good tips. How long have you had this business?
Well, the business as it exists today, like with its name and all that stuff, since 2013, but I've been doing this work for nearly 20 years.
So you did this well before you had a kid?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
For sure.
So you, did you say your son, was it a son?
Son.
3 years old?
3.
Okay. So you're an older dad. If you've been doing it for 20 years.
I guess so.
So 40-ish?
No, not quite 40-ish, but in my 30s.
So how have you been doing it for 20 years?
Well, nearly 20 years. I mean, so ever since I wrapped up my, my high school and was going deep, starting out college, which was really helping people. And obviously, the number of people I've supported over time has grown quite a bit. But as far as, seeing a lot of trends and helping a bunch of students, thousands over the years, it's seen a lot change.
So I just put 20 on top of what somebody would get out of med school at, which is what? 26, 28 or something. I figured, well, 20 plus 28 is like 48. So, all right. So that's where I went with that. I wasn't, looking at your hairstyle and saying, well, this guy's ancient.
I know it's the gray streaks, that's what's getting you.
Medical. I was just talking with a friend about this. So I have a friend that I'm hanging out with here at Rapid City, and he's in the Air Force.
Yeah.
And he's a PA.
Okay.
And so we're just kind of talking about this the other day. Like I'm big against debt. And so some of the biggest debt in America is student loans, as you probably deal with all the time, especially in the medical field, because it's not cheap to go through medical school. Sure. So you're talking hundreds of $1,000s of racked up before you've really made your first dollar.
Yeah.
And it puts you in a hard hole. Of course, there's certainly opportunities to make a lot of money, but not every doctor goes on to make mega bucks. Some of pediatricians really don't make the big bucks that people think about as far as doctors.
Sure.
Or small town docs, things like. I'm sure there's other examples. Do you counsel people on, I guess, how to get loans or other strategies? Because what I was talking about with my friend was the military. If we couldn't afford to pay for medical school for my kids, and it was a student loan issue, I would almost encourage them to consider the military, because that's a place where you're going to get paid. They will pay you, they will give you the education. And I think it's a stepped up commitment. I don't know if you know more about that than I do. But they're going to pay you to go to school essentially, which is a whole different game.
Sure. It is. But so we do, assist students with answering questions about loans and, securing scholarships and all this kind of stuff. I mean, there are some students we work with who their families are very well to do, and, their parents just basically write a check, for them to go to school. But the majority of our students are going to take out some amount of loan, whether for the full amount, like, my brother did when he went to medical school, But also, when they're going to, or taking out a partial loan, whatever, maybe half of it, 3/4 of it, whatever the case might be. And so that's sort of an expected part of this process. And you're right, like, the promise, I think, to a lot of people is, you're going to go to school, you're going to do residency. During those residency years, you're going to make like $50,000 to $60,000. And then after, that's when you're going to cash in or whatever. But then there's a lot of, there isn't a lot of financial education for physicians, right? So a lot of people will have these loans, and then all of a sudden they're getting a $200,000, $300,000 salary, and they're spending more than
they buy a couple Mercedes, they buy a mansion.
Exactly. And now their loan pay down rate has slowed down, and sometimes they end up, they wonder, like, where's all this money going? I'm making, but they don't understand taxes. I get questions sometimes from, I've gotten questions from advisors on our team about what's gross pay and net pay. Questions like this, like, I thought I was going to, all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of financial education, and I think that it starts early, or should start early. And unfortunately, our, schooling system isn't educating people about this kind of stuff. And so as far as, opportunities like going to, if you go to ROTC in college, they can pay for your college. If you join, the uniformed, services, and they'll pay for your medical school as well, and all this kind of stuff. You're right, though, there's a commitment even after residency. So when you actually do the math, Townsend, like your earning potential in the forces is probably going to be lower than what it would be if you weren't in the forces. So actually, right. So that kind of also slows down the time.
But then you don't have to necessarily stay in the forces forever. I think there's an extended commitment you have to make.
Correct.
Because they're training you. But you can go into civilian life afterwards.
Yes, but I'm saying that extended commitment, when you pit that and the lower salary associated with that against people who took out the loans and got the pay, it doesn't shake out that different. It's not as great of a deal financially as you would think in the long term. Now, if someone wants to join the services, of course they should. And we assist students every year with joining, those programs. I'm just saying that I don't think that finances should be the primary driver of someone joining or not joining, the services. Just because of the way the math shakes out.
I agree with that. So yeah, we don't want, half committed people serving.
Yeah, so. Not even that. I'm not even talking about commitment, but I'm saying, like, if you did it because, like, that was the driver, I'm just saying even from a math standpoint, it's not as great of a deal. So I encourage students to do what they want to do career-wise, because the math, like, sort of shakes out the same.
Well, so I guess it depends what the income is, right?
Yeah,
because some doctors make more than others, and it might be geography, but then I think there's a factor of not everyone who starts college finishes college. Not everyone who starts medical school finishes school. Sometimes people rack up a ton of debt and they don't have a degree to show for it.
That also happens. I mean, the thing is, a lot of high achieving, colleges and stuff like that, the graduation rates tend to be higher just because of, who was going into those schools in the first place, right? So and then in medical school, it's also the case where graduation rates are actually really high. With medical school, it's essentially, if you want to graduate, you will, right? Like, there are so many support systems in place. It's hard to fail out of medical school. It's not a very common thing. Now, I do know some people who finish medical school and they're like, I don't want to practice medicine. And then there's, they're going to have to, I don't know, do consulting work or something entrepreneurial. That happens all the time too. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an important part of the discussion. And that's why, our goal isn't just to, like, help people get in, but it's also to mentor them, through the process and answer any questions they have along the way, and consider these kinds of things. Because, when you're 21, 22, 23 years old, making these decisions for your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, I know that I didn't have the full picture when I was 22. Heck, I still
who does?
Who does, right? It always changes. But the thing is, you got to be a little bit of, like, voice from the future, when you've seen a lot of students having gone through it and being a mentor to them.
So do you know what the graduation rates are for med school across the board? Not necessarily, the Ivy Leagues and the prestigious ones, but
I don't have the specific number. I would wager they're well into the 90s. 90%.
Oh, yeah, that's really high.
Yeah.
Interesting. Things I did not know.
Yeah.
So, so I was just learning this week as well. So, family practice doctors, a lot of the times, so I don't know if you've ever heard back from students or anything like that. It's not exactly what they thought it would be for family practice specifically. And so what I was hearing was it's a lot of complainers, and that kind of drives the spirit out of a few doctors of, man, all day, every day, it's just someone complaining. It's over things that maybe aren't really valid. It's just trying to get insurance, pay for things, or trying to get out of work, or somehow making an excuse for something. It's just a lot of whining about things that aren't really. I guess it feels like you're not actually helping people because you spend so much time with people that don't actually need the help.
Yeah, I mean, so there are, I hear this, I hear this at times, when people go to school, 4 years. And again, we're always looking ahead when we're doing these long, you know, when we're going through these long educational processes, we're always looking ahead, right? Like, ooh, it's okay, med school, it's maybe a bit of a slog, and I'm just ready to go to residency where I'm actually going to be doing the thing I wanted to do from the get-go. And then you get to residency and you're working 60-hour weeks, maybe 80-hour weeks, and getting 50, 60K, and you're tired. And it's, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years. And that can be, it could sort of drain you. And then you become an attendant. And it's like, no, it's okay. But once I make an attending, position, and once I get to call the shots and I'm making 300K, like, that's when I'm going to, but then, there are a lot of physicians that I see, who say, oh, they get into their job literally into year 1, year 2. They basically look to their left, look to their right, and say, this is kind of it. Like, I come in, I do my shift, I come into the office, but I'm seeing patients, and yes, every patient is different, but I'm doing similar procedures, seeing similar things. Is this what I'm going to do for 10, 20, 30 years? And so that, people come to terms with that. Essentially, they've been looking forward to something, but once they get to that attending position, unless they're, I don't know, going to rise up to be chief of the hospital or, do something else, entrepreneur, whatever the case might be, a lot of folks, I think, they're, it seems a little bit repetitive, but you're also getting a nice paycheck. We all know it's harder to leave a job with a bigger paycheck than a job with a lower paycheck. And so these are kinds of things that, people, you have to really love the work. And you're right, it's not glamorous, right? It's not, I think it's like people see people in scrubs and their stethoscope and, hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. And, thank you so much, doctor, you did X, Y, and Z. But a lot of time it's not that,
Well, and the Grey's Anatomy TV show just makes it seem so exciting every day.
It's not all janitorial closets is what you're saying, Townsend. But no, I see what you're saying. But yeah, I think people have to contend with that. People have to contend with this idea of it's not just the fun parts. The same way, if you become an investment banker, it's not just woohoo, $10 million paid, all this kind of stuff. There's a lot of the time it's, there are difficult moments and you have wins along the way, of course.
Sure.
But it is a job like other jobs, and
there's a drudgery to it.
Yeah, but you have to be into that. You have to be into serving patients long term. You have to realize people only come to you when they're upset, right? Like a divorce lawyer doesn't just see happy people every day. They're seeing pissed off people. And sure. When people are coming to you as a physician, they're not coming to you like, hey, what brings you in today? Nothing, doc, just want to tell you that I'm doing great. Like, I don't know that anybody says that, maybe
I'm going to do that. I'm going to do that one day.
You should.
I'm just going to make an appointment.
Will have a good story. He's going to say some dude came in and told me this thing, right? But you have to consider these things.
So we don't know the percentage, but I really would not have expected that.
So I did a quick Google search, and between the mid 90s and about the mid 2010s, the 4-year graduation rate was in the low to mid 80%. But if you did 6 years after matriculation, so within 6 years of starting, it was actually 95.9%. And this
so you don't necessarily fail out of med school. You just have to repeat.
So, yeah. So people who do have academic struggles, there are many systems in place to get back in it. You retake tests and stuff like that. And so, yeah, again, most people who start med school and want to stay in it, it's a fairly high graduation rate.
Gosh, I mean, that's something I guess I need to start asking the doctors that I go see. Hey, how many years did it take you to get through?
Uh-oh.
I know they'll shovel all you guys through.
Yeah. Uh-oh. Were you a 4-year person, a 6-year person? Yeah.
I'm gonna start asking that.
You'll be a
That'd be
popular
funny.
patient.
Yeah. um, I can't remember the last time I went to go see a doctor. It's probably not a good thing.
Yeah,
So, are you married?
I am.
How long you been married?
Married 6 years in a couple months.
Okay, you got a kid that's 3, living in San Diego. Um, what was are you an MD?
I'm not. So I did my PhD in
Okay.
psychology. I was pre-med all through college, did very well. I was doing a lot of mental health research and was always drawn to that world. I always told people, hey, if I'm gonna go to medical school, I'm gonna become a psychiatrist. So I think took a detour and did similar work.
And so how long? So you were married for about 3 years, and you were in your what, early 30s when you had your first kid.
Mm-hmm.
So how was that shift? So walk me through that, if you can remember it, from going from I guess single life and doing the doctor thing and getting to live life on your terms to then being married and having a child. How did that experience realistically go for you?
Yeah, I mean, there are so many angles to think about. There's my life, my general life and personal life, romantic life, whatever. There's also how it impacted my work life, right? And the changes I made to that. I mean, so obviously being single to being in a relationship, and certainly being married, you just don't like make decisions shooting from the hip anymore. You don't just say, all right, I'm doing this thing tonight. You don't just like get in your car and leave. And well, maybe some people do. I don't. But
Yeah, you
having
shouldn't. Let's go ahead
you
and put that out
shouldn't.
there.
Right. And so obviously being in a relationship was like, I know that I would, I go to bed earlier with each progressive step, being married, having a kid, etc. That's definitely changed. I mean, with a kid, it's just, I mean, there are just so many more constraints. And I don't mean that in necessarily a negative way, but there are sleep
Oh, it's
times
very
and wake
true.
up times and nap times. I think you think a lot more about everything you're going to do. Like, I want to run to the store and grab bread. And when they're really, when your kid's with you, you don't just like grab your key and run out of the house. You got to get your kid ready. You got to put him in the car. You got to, in the car seat. And then you have these, how many times have we had these questions to ourselves, Townsend? Like, do I really want bread? Like, and you might not do certain things. So I feel like you do things more like you really want the things you do like more and more, like when you have, wife and kid and all this kind of stuff. And so work-wise, it was actually really interesting. We were at the business fortunately has grown every single year. And I remember, I was seeing this trend, and when my wife got pregnant and told me that she was pregnant, I had a moment where I was like, oh my gosh, like the business can't operate the way it currently does with a baby. And that was sort of a triggering event for me, where I was like, all these things that I sort of do out of, institutional knowledge and memory, and also being like day-to-day uh management of our team and all this kind of stuff. How do I, remove or reduce the reliance on me? I think that was really critical for our business. So I got to writing, manuals and procedures and developing systems and all this kind of stuff, because it's a situation where sometimes when you develop a system in a business, it oftentimes works when you have, one person, two people, five people, whatever. But then when you do times 10, it's a completely different thing. If you have 5 students versus 50 students, it's a completely different thing. And then, if you go from 50 to 500, 500 to that, 5,000, whatever the case might be. And so you always have to be honest with yourself. Like, okay, the system I put in place, would it work if it was times 10? The answer might be yes, and that's great. And the answer might be no. And you might say, okay, well, that's okay. I'm going to use this until that next step. But I remember thinking, when my wife told me that she's pregnant, like, okay, I need to think about, even if, we don't have times 10 the students, what if someday, because of a family commitment, I have 10% of my bandwidth? and how do I empower and train people to basically do what we do and experience no loss in quality, even if I'm not, touching everything. Right. And so that was a big shift for me. And I think that was actually, so I'm very grateful. Even for, I mean, I love my son, I love my wife. I'm very grateful for them in general, but from even a business standpoint, I'm very grateful because those events forced me to rethink the way we do things. I don't think the business could exist the way it does today if I didn't make those decisions that were essentially forced upon. If I was a single guy and I can work 16 hours a day and not care about it, pleasing or upsetting anyone, all this kind of stuff, I would just do that, pedal to the metal. But I've had to rethink systems and growth and all this kind of stuff. And it just also forces you to think about what's necessary. People always say stuff like, you need a bustling social media page or whatever. And it's like, I don't know actually that I do. If certain other things drive your traffic, maybe you don't need it. And you say, well, I could spend more time on this with unknown returns, or I can spend more time with my family. Is that thing really going to move the needle? Do I care if it does? Right. It sort of forces you, going back to that car example, to go get bread from the store. You really wonder, like, do I really want to do this? How much do I need it? It basically makes you think, because you're weighing these efforts.
The value of time becomes a very real thing.
Absolutely. It just, you're just thinking about time and opportunity costs in a whole different way that you didn't prior to being married or having a kid. That was my experience.
So yeah, for sure. So I did something similar, not when I had a kid, because when I had a kid, I didn't have a business, but I launched it shortly after he was born.
Yeah.
But around the time of my second kid, I realized I was an owner operator.
Sure.
And my thing was more about death. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, some bad traffic accident or stroke out, I've kind of screwed my family. So because I am the driving force in this business.
You're the key man.
And if I'm gone, this whole thing's just going to collapse.
Yeah.
All the customers will flee. Vendors will be gone, and the employees are going to go find another job. Yeah. And so I was too much the crux, and and so I wrote. I mean, it was like a couple inches thick binder of really thinking about the business, and like you said, it really makes you reassess how things operate. And that was probably the best thing, or the most effective thing I ever did in the business, was really sitting down. It took probably over the course of a couple months to really do it right. To really assess, how do we operate this business, and being able to put it on paper and verbalize it. And it made all the difference in how we operate. We changed a lot of things. It gave me such clarity as a business owner. Yep. And a little peace as a father, simply because I knew then if I died, there was a literal binder my wife could go to, and she knew what to say to the customers. She knew what to say to the vendors, what to say to the employees. I wrote letters to the employees to make sure this thing continued to run, at least until we could sell, or she could hire a manager to kind of replace my role.
Sure.
And to not make me the linchpin in the entire thing. I mean, because that's not it's not a good way to run a business that wants to grow.
It's also not really a business in some ways.
It's a profitable hobby.
Sure.
Yeah. So yeah, being able to essentially replace myself as the owner on paper, and then how to align and flow and how the business operates. Yeah, it was the best thing we ever did. Now I did it after the second kid, and then I realized I replaced myself as Townsend, the business owner, so well. That's when I started writing the content that I'm doing now, which is how do I replace Townsend, the dad, which is a little bit more complex and less fixed. And that's the content we're sharing now on 100% Dad, 10 years later.
Yeah.
Which is, same thing. What are your priorities, and what's important?
Yeah.
So it's not a lot of people do that. There's a lot of small business owners, even successful business owners. They've never really sat there and gone through that process of reflection on their business. They run it day to day, fire to fire.
Yeah. You gotta think about how it's going to survive you. Because otherwise, it's it's you. You're like you said, the key man. And this isn't just about buying good key man insurance, which is essentially life insurance for business owners, but also thinking about all these different scenarios. Or what if you're just out? You don't have internet for a week. What happens? Who does what? Who's empowered to do what? And you need to train other people to not necessarily know every single thing you do, but collectively for them to
Sure.
know what you know, right? And if there's that brain trust that can come together during that sort of period, it's really valuable. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. You're the one that brought it up. All right, so the original question was, and you jumped into kind of how it is now. So what was your perception of what fatherhood would be, pre-delivery versus post-delivery, focusing on those like first 6 weeks of infancy?
Yeah. What it was versus what it is. It's some of it is a blur, and
what you thought it would be versus reality.
What I thought it would be. What I thought it would be. I mean, I don't think those things were super different, to be quite frank. I knew that it would require, I knew that raising a baby requires a lot of time. I didn't quite realize how many diapers we'd have to change. The thing that was wild so I thought, like, they're up a few hours, they sleep a few hours, and all this kind of stuff, and it's going to be a rough, first 6 months, and all those things were true from a sleep standpoint and whatnot. But I remember thinking I'd have more uninterrupted chunks of time than I actually did. And because if your baby is up 2 hours before they nap again, they're feeding in the beginning, especially, they take so long to feed. Maybe they're feeding for 20 minutes, and then you're burping them, and then they poop, and you change them and you hold them. It's not like you just put them in a rocker and they just hang out there. Like, you're actively doing stuff when they're awake, and then they're asleep. And then, like 2 hours, 3 hours later, they might wake up. And, by the time you're, I don't know, eating or showering or doing exercise or whatever, you only have like half an hour left to do work, and then they're up again. And then, oh, God forbid, you want to spend time with your spouse or watch a TV show or something like that. So it just, I knew I would have limited time. I didn't realize quite how limited it was going to be. And then you also, you have all these plans of, I want to do X, Y, and Z, but then your baby's up and you just kind of want to hang out with your baby. Or maybe they're sleeping, you just kind of want to stare at your baby, like, So I think, we come into it of like, it's going to be these, like, that you think you can schedule your life the way you do when they're older or pre-baby, but you can't really, because you're sort of at the baby's whim. And so you also have to have conversations with your spouse about, who's doing what and when. And what are our responsibilities? Because if you just do okay, baby's asleep, I'm going to go do this thing, but your wife had expectations that you're actually going to run this errand, well, now you're in trouble, right? You're going to have an argument. So these things came up all the time.
Yeah. That's a super good tip. So how did you prepare? Because you seem like you went into it pretty knowledgeable. So what was your preparation for fatherhood? Did you have younger siblings or brothers and sisters, other kids that you were familiar with, or is it reading books and kind of studying, or do you just have a natural intuition for what this was going to be?
I don't, good question. My wife and I, our friends and family members make fun of us all the time that we discuss serious things too much. So we're the kind of people, even pre-marriage, talking about how many kids, talking about finances, talking about, raising them in the church, all this kind of stuff. And you
got made fun of for talking about the things that you should absolutely be talking about.
Well, but that's not common, I don't think, in our society. You tell me, right? Like, so, a lot of people are like, man, you guys like have too many serious conversations. So yeah, sure, maybe we are too much that way. But I think like having those conversations was really nice because we had the playbook as far, not like knowing everything a baby would do or what a baby would be like, but knowing how we were going to be together as a couple and how we want to raise this child, what our values were for parenting. So, I'll give ourselves credit for having those, kind of those grown-up conversations, even while we were dating. So that was something that was really important to us. In addition to that, I mean, just I guess we're fortunate. We're both child psychologists by training. Not that, being a child psychologist prepares you for, raising a 6 month old or 2 year or 2 month old or whatever the case might be. But just as far as, the importance of attachment and, spending time with your child and building relationship with your child and with your family, those things really matter to us. And then, we both have older siblings who have kids. And so I'm an uncle and she's an aunt to several kids. And, just seeing that and having that experience was also very valuable to us.
So Shirag brought up a really great point about just having those, real discussions. He said he was getting made fun of for, and those are things I think is top tier advice for any new dad and new husband, is have the conversations prior the best you can, or as early as you can. And if you're already married, then the time is now. And if you're about to get married, again, the time is now to have those discussions about finances and in-laws and how you want to live life and how many kids you want to have, and how you want to raise those kids, how you feel about discipline, what church you want to go to. Do you want to raise your kids in a certain faith and in a certain way? How close do you want to live to your in-laws? And the sensitive topics that at least in marriages are often the big reasons why the marriage ends. So let's have those conversations and be in agreement, or at least have the knowledge of each other, so we can prepare for it and we have that understanding, and it's not a shock down the line. But same thing with having that new baby is, preparing as much as possible and having discussions about what roles are going to be and, what the expectations are. That's an absolutely great tip by Shirag. Unfortunately, the interview got messed up by me. It's one of the downsides to being on the road all the time, is signal is sometimes there and is sometimes not, and I'm almost entirely dependent on the cellular signals, and everyone knows those are super reliable. So unfortunately, we kind of had to cut that interview up early because it got too choppy, and we just couldn't communicate well anymore. But I wish we could have kept it going. It would have been. We had some fascinating discussions. There's a lot of knowledge there, and Shirag said, "This is 100% Dad podcast."
This is 100% Dad. Find our current tour schedule on 100dad.com, 100dad.com, on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and more at 100dad, 100dad. Email Townsend at 100dad.com.